Welcome to my Song of Ice and Fire show, where I talk about A Song of Ice and Fire, the fantasy series by George R. R. Martin. I'm going to assume that everybody watching this has watched parts 1 and 2, so if you have not read all of the books up to A Dance with Dragons, you probably shouldn't be here. The things I'm spoiling in this series are very big and very secret. They're secrets about A Song of Ice and Fire that literally nobody knows about, except for me, as far as I can tell. And you now, if you've watched the first 2 episodes. I know that a lot of other A Song of Ice and Fire YouTubers say the same sort of thing, or at least suggest it, but I can assure you that I'm different, because I'm right. I don't know what those other analysts are doing, I just share my research. Take it or leave it, I don't care. So in the first 2 episodes, I said a lot of crazy things, and corroborated some of them, but I feel like I need to corroborate more of them. Or more of the same ones. Because they are so crazy, and there's so much more to cover. The main crazy thing that I said, that's going to need the most corroboration, maybe kind of strangely, is that Rhaegar is gay. And I think the Rhaegar and Lyanna rape might actually be, in the end, the biggest thing that I need to evidence using the story. But my gut is telling me that I should probably focus on Rhaegar being gay first, because that's the one detail that upends pretty much everything the audience thinks they knows about A Song of Ice and Fire. For example, if Rhaegar is gay, that means there's no chance in hell that R+L=J was a consensual romance, or that Rhaegar was pursuing Lyanna. Because gay men aren't interested in having sex with women, teenager or adult. And so all of their criticisms that Rhaegar is a pedophile or some adjacent accusation are dead in the water. Rhaegar being gay is more or less revealed in A Dance with Dragons, but it's revealed through subtext, and because the collective consciousness of the A Song of Ice and Fire audience is actually terrible at understanding its subtext, they don't see how the passage proves that Rhaegar is gay beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm going to read the passage, it's about 3 paragraphs, and then I'll walk through the thinking that proves it. The passage is in A Dance with Dragons, The Griffin Reborn. It's Jon Connington's 2nd chapter. Jon Connington has finally retaken his home castle, Griffin's Roost. And he's literally walking down memory lane as he travels through his castle, having been separated from it for so long. Jon Connington's talking to his Captain General, and then they part ways. And he says, "You must excuse me, Captain General. My Lord Father is buried beneath the sept, and it has been too many years since last I prayed for him." "Of course, my lord." Yet when they parted, Jon Connington did not go to the sept. Instead, his steps led him up to the roof of the East Tower, the tallest at Griffin's Roost. As he climbed, he remembered past ascents, 100 with his Lord Father, who liked to stand and look out over woods and crags and sea, and know that all he saw belonged to House Connington. And one, only one, with Rhaegar Targaryen. Prince Rhaegar was returning from Dorne, and he and his escort had lingered here a fortnight. He was so young then, and I was younger. Boys, the both of us. At the welcoming feast, the prince had taken up his silver-stringed harp and played for them. A song of love and doom, Jon Connington recalled, and every woman in the hall was weeping when he put down the harp. Not the men, of course. Particularly not his own father, whose only love was land. Lord Armand Connington spent the entire evening trying to win the prince to his side in his dispute with Lord Morrigan. The door to the roof of the tower was stuck so fast that it was plain no one had opened it in years. He had to put his shoulder to it to force it open, but when Jon Connington stepped out onto the high battlements, the view was just as intoxicating as he remembered. The crag with its wind-carved rocks and jagged spires, the sea below growling and worrying at the foot of the castle like some restless beast, endless leagues of sky and cloud, the wood with its autumnal colors. "Your father's lands are beautiful," Prince Rhaegar had said, standing right where Jon was standing now. And the boy he'd been had replied, "One day they will all be mine." As if that could impress a prince who was heir to the entire realm, from the arbor to the wall. Griffin's Roost had been his, eventually, if only for a few short years. From here, Jon Connington had ruled broad lands extending many leagues to the west, north, and south, just as his father and his father's father had before him. But his father and his father's father had never lost their lands. He had. I rose too high, loved too hard, dared too much. I tried to grasp a star, overreached, and fell. So that's the passage whose subtext tells us that Rhaegar is gay. But you have to do some thinking in order to see it. The first thing you should notice is that Jon Connington is in love with Rhaegar. Regardless of how Rhaegar feels about Jon Connington, it's clear that Jon Connington has romantic feelings for Rhaegar. And this is kind of where the audience's interpretation ends. The popular thinking is that yes, Jon Connington loved Rhaegar, but his love was unrequited. Rhaegar didn't have any feelings toward him. And this is just a one-way obsession. And it's a strong obsession, because apparently it's strong enough to cause Jon Connington to devote his life to taking care of Rhaegar's son, because he's half Rhaegar, I guess. Jon Connington taking care of and raising Rhaegar's son, Aegon, could certainly make sense, while Jon Connington's love for Rhaegar is unrequited. But it would also certainly make more sense if Jon Connington's love for Rhaegar was requited, because then Aegon is not just the genetic copy of the man that Jon loved, or Jon Connington, Rhaegar's son, is a living spirit of Rhaegar. And of course Jon would want to protect that more if Rhaegar loved him back than if Rhaegar didn't. So that's some of the proof that Rhaegar is gay in the subtext of this passage. But most of the proof that Rhaegar was gay comes from considering how much sense Jon Connington's thoughts and words here make if Rhaegar is not gay. For example, Jon Connington thinks to himself, as he climbed he remembered past ascents, 100 with his lord father, who liked to stand and look out over woods and crags and sea, and know that all he saw belonged to House Connington, and one, parentheses, only one, exclamation mark, with Rhaegar Targaryen. So the only one, parentheses, tells us that Jon Connington would have liked whatever happened at the top of that tower with Rhaegar to have happened more than once. And as the scene is told to us now, all that we can be sure that happened at the top of that tower is that they saw an amazing view. A view of woods and crags and sea and whatever. All the lands that belong to House Connington. And as special as a great view can be, no view is special enough to explain the magnitude of emotionality and romanticism in Jon Connington's thoughts here, except if something sexual happened between these two men at the top of this tower. Jon Connington thinks to himself, he was so young then, and I was younger. Boys, the both of us. It's another thought that doesn't make any sense, unless Jon and Rhaegar had sex. Absent sex, it could be that Jon Connington is romanticizing their youth and their innocence the way that anybody else might under ordinary circumstances. I mean, we all look back fondly on our youth. We have the rose-tinted glasses, as they say, about it. But once again, there are comments that express emotionality so strong that that explanation feels completely insufficient. So the question is, what could have happened here to cause sentimentality so strong? Romantic sentimentality, specifically. And the only answer that can make sense to that question is something romantic. And then the question could be, what romantic? And then all that's left are homosexual encounters. And so once you get to the point of recognizing that Jon Connington's thoughts here do not make sense unless he and Rhaegar had sex, then in order for Rhaegar to not be gay, for that interpretation to still be true, you have to consider that Jon Connington raped Rhaegar, or coerced him in some way that he wouldn't have liked, but might have just gone along with, or out of fear, or just pressure, or whatever. And that's the only remaining viable interpretation of Rhaegar being straight. And if Jon Connington had raped Rhaegar, or coerced him into doing something he didn't want to do or regretted later, what do you think Rhaegar, the son of the king, would have done about it? Maybe nothing, but almost certainly he would have told on Jon Connington. He would have went straight to his father, King Aerys, and said, "Father, I was raped at Griffin's Roost by Jon Connington." And then something would have been done about it. Jon Connington probably would have been put to death. Jon Connington's father might even have been put to death if Aerys was angry enough. And that probably would have happened regardless of what Rhaegar wanted to happen. And the Faith of the Seven might have been involved, because both rape and homosexuality are crimes against the Faith of the Seven. It would have been this huge scandal. But apparently, it wasn't. This passage in A Dance of the Dragons, the 5th book of the series, is the first time the reader gets any hint that anything like this happened between Rhaegar and anybody. There's no alternative account of this event. This is the first one and the only one. And because Rhaegar and Jon Connington were alone in that tower, there won't be an alternative account. This is not only the first and only, but the last account of what happened between Jon and Rhaegar at the top of that tower in Griffin's Roost. And so Jon Connington's feelings about it, and the strength of his feelings, are the only clues we're going to get about what happened. And because Jon Connington's thoughts are full of romantic sentimentality and sexual overtones, combined with the fact that there was no scandal about a homosexual rape happening here, between Rhaegar and Jon Connington or anybody, the logical conclusion is that Rhaegar and Jon Connington had consensual gay sex at the top of that tower in Griffin's Roost. And that's what Jon Connington is remembering, and why he's remembering it in such a romantic language as he is. So it's another situation where there's a body of text, or a piece of text in the story, that seems to mean one thing at first, and then by the end of the story it means something totally different, or even opposite to what it seemed to mean, even though not a word of the text changed. It's a quality of A Song of Ice and Fire's surprises that I think is brilliant and incredible, for a number of reasons. It's a story that highlights the importance of perspective, and the importance of context, and the importance of subtext, and it proves that even when two people are looking at exactly the same thing, they can see it completely differently, because they're perceiving it differently. Because before they approached it, their ideas and assumptions were not exactly the same. They were different. Even if just slightly, that's enough to produce a difference in interpretation. And if they're greatly different, that's enough to produce a completely opposite interpretation that's even more correct than the original and popular one. So anyway, this passage that proves that Rhaegar is gay, I'm certain will continue to be ignored by the audience. And as it becomes more commonly acknowledged, in order to preserve their suite of R plus L equals J theories, they're going to say that Rhaegar was bisexual rather than homosexual, because the driving impulse is female empowerment. They want Rhaegar to belong to Lyanna, because that is their self-insert, at least for the women. The consciousnesses of the women are the collective consciousness of A Song of Ice and Fire, because the men who read it notice what the women want, and then just align themselves with it. They want girl bosses and female empowerment, and they want to put forward theories that advance that cause. And then thinking that they're going to get something from those women that they want, those men tend to align themselves with that ideology and defend it militantly by upvoting things that agree with it, downvoting things that disagree with it, and shouting down and cursing and accusing anybody who dares to put forward ideas that challenge it. So regardless that the A Song of Ice and Fire audience, like most fantasy audiences, is majority male, the collective consciousness that's in control of that audience and driving its behavior is mostly female. And not a healthy kind of female. It's a very toxic, jealous kind of female that wants to be a man and wants to subvert male hero roles and turn them into either villains or women. But not both at the same time. Definitely not both. A female villain would be heresy in that feminist worldview. So that's why such interpretations are not allowed in A Song of Ice and Fire discussion. So one of the things A Song of Ice and Fire's central mystery points to, one of the blindnesses of its audience, is simply that women value wealth and status when sexually selecting. More than men do. Way more than men do. And that's a lot of what's driving the insistence that Rhaegar and Lyanna are a thing, one way or another, and causing the audience to insist upon the truth of this supposedly problematic yet also undeniable situation of a 20-something-year-old man pursuing and having sex with and a baby with a teenage girl. They're trying to have their self-insert Lyanna Stark be the hero and the victim at the same time, ignoring the inherent contradictions that a hero and a victim are in many ways opposites. There's a moment in A Game of Thrones where Ned Stark is remembering that Robert loved brothels, and then he starts wondering if Rhaegar would have frequented brothels. And he thinks to himself, somehow he thought not. And it's one of those lines that has always seemed to discredit the official narrative that Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna, because it seems to support Rhaegar's good character. There's hardly a woman in the kingdom who wouldn't happily have sex with Rhaegar given the opportunity. With more options than he could ever want, you would have to be an especially good man to resist that much temptation. So the reason Rhaegar was uninterested in brothels was that he was uninterested in women, and brothels are where you go for women. Certainly brothels have men and boys too, but it's mostly women. Oh, let's talk about Elia Martell for a minute, Rhaegar's wife. At the tourney of Harrenhal, when Rhaegar crowned Lyanna the Queen of Love and Beauty, and quote-unquote all the smiles died, a lot of the important information we're missing from that scandal is everyone's reactions to it. But George R. R. Martin is drip-feeding us some of those reactions in The World of Ice and Fire and in his public statements. In The World of Ice and Fire, we get some reactions from the Stark family, where we can see that Robert laughed about it publicly, but privately he was upset by it. He thought it was like an offense to Lyanna, I think it was. Maybe he felt threatened by Rhaegar as competition for Lyanna. I forget the details, but I'll throw it up on the screen. Brandon got really offended. He thought it was like a dishonor to Lyanna because she was already betrothed to Robert. But Ned's reaction is the most telling, because Ned's reaction was that he just got like a serious look on his face or something. I think it says he was no more pleased than Brandon, but like he sat quietly or something like that. It's a reaction that stands apart from Robert's and Brandon's reaction, because it's the only reaction of the set that can accommodate an interpretation in which it's actually not Rhaegar at fault. Ned's reaction is the only reaction that shows that he's the only one who might be considering that Rhaegar is not the person at fault in this situation. And so now that we know that Lyanna was a skin changer, and that she skin changed Rhaegar and placed the crown of blue roses in her own lap as Rhaegar, it's pretty easy to see what was happening there in Ned's reaction. Ned knew that his sister was a skin changer, because that's his sister. Of course he knew. And so Ned saw exactly what happened as it was happening. He saw, oh, Rhaegar would never do this, but Lyanna would definitely do this, and could. So that's what's happening here. That's not Rhaegar, that's Lyanna, and she's doing a big bad right now, and no one can see it but me. So in that scene, unlike Brandon and Robert, Ned's displeasure is with Lyanna, not with Rhaegar. It's such a cool little hint, because you do have to notice that potential for an alternative interpretation is what sets Ned's reaction apart from the other reactions. And then ask yourself, why would the authors set Ned's reaction apart like this? Unless that potential is actualized. Otherwise, the reactions don't tell us anything we didn't already know. Like we already know that Robert was outraged by it, and maybe even jealous of Rhaegar. And we already know that Brandon was outraged by it, because he went to King's Landing and started shouting for Rhaegar to come out and die. What we didn't know about the situation was that Lyanna was actually the bad guy in it, not Rhaegar. So that's why Ned's reaction is the only reaction in which that is a viable reading. Because Ned knew his sister was a skin changer, and he saw what she was doing as she was doing it. Another reaction we get, I think it's just from George R. R. Martin's comments. I don't think it's anywhere in the story. If I remember right, George was advising an artist who was drawing the scene. And he was advising the artist on Elia's reaction. And he said something like Elia's reaction was that she was sitting there stiff-backed, pretending like nothing was wrong. And so, like Ned's reaction, it's another reaction that does not immediately put the blame on Rhaegar. It accommodates other interpretations besides Rhaegar bad, Lyanna good. Because it accommodates interpretations where Elia was not offended. Our tendency is to assume that Elia, being the wife of Rhaegar, is supremely offended by it. But we don't actually know that. We're never told that directly, or shown that. So isn't it interesting that when we are directly shown Elia's reaction, at least in this backdoor sort of way through the author's comments to an artist, like Ned's reaction, there's a viable reading of it in which Elia is not outraged. So what really happened with Elia was that she knew when she married Rhaegar that he was gay, but it didn't matter. It doesn't prevent him from producing heirs with her, and that means that her children and Dorne are in one generation going to be the king of Westeros, regardless that their father was homosexual, and maybe even needed some third-party help to impregnate her. From Elia's perspective, compared to the kinghood, who cares? Who cares if Rhaegar is a sexual deviant, not going to be genuinely attracted to her? And so once again, it's a situation that preys upon the audience's blindness to the fact that women are more interested in money and status when selecting a sexual partner than men are. But the fantasy audience being mostly male, we, like everybody, tend to assume that other people see the world the same way we do, and feel about it the same way we do. Which is a good starting point, but obviously not fail-proof. So what Elia's reaction shows us, Elia being stiff-backed and trying to pretend like nothing was wrong, is that from Elia's point of view, nothing was especially wrong. She already knew Rhaegar was gay, and him crowning Lyanna did not look to be a big deal. It doesn't hurt Elia's feelings that much, because she knows that Rhaegar was already not sexually in love with her in that way. And so Rhaegar crowning another woman the Queen of Love and Beauty, from Elia's point of view, looked unwise on Rhaegar's part, or maybe a little confusing, but it didn't look like a betrayal, because there was no love there to betray. All there was the inheritance. Some other subtle clues that Rhaegar is gay are that there's a couple of passages where he's like riding his horse in a tournament or something, and he has like these bright red streamers flying behind him. And I'm sure there are other people in the story who have bright streamers flying behind them. Well, I'm not sure actually, but there probably are. So it's a clue that doesn't need to mean that Rhaegar is gay. But for a toxically masculine straight man like me, there are definitely lines that when I read them kind of make me like cringe a little bit at how flamboyant they are for this hero who's supposedly like the pinnacle of manliness and martial prowess and all that. Like I would tend to give it a medieval license and just say, well, this is what their culture was. They were more flamboyant and more free with colors and decorations and all that. They weren't as afraid of being perceived as feminine. Certainly not with colors, because colors were a mark of royalty and wealth. And yeah, their decorations were often gaudy, but unlike us, they didn't have a booming design industry, you know? All these psychological insights about what humans perceive to be beautiful and why So yeah, they had a lot of gaudy decorations, because they didn't know any better. But as with the Night of the Laughing Tree mystery, when you notice that you're giving the story a license to get away with silly fantasy things, and you revoke that license, what you're left with is a sober reading of the situation. And the sober reading in this case is that a man being too concerned with flamboyantly decorating himself is on its face an indicator of femininity. And then femininity is on its face an indicator of potential homosexuality. And in Rhaegar's case, that is the case. He is gay. The subtext of this part of the story being, I guess, surprise the toxic men take the win this round. The straight man had a better gaydar than the snowflakes. It's shocking, but only if you didn't notice that the snowflakes don't actually care about gay people. They're just pretending to. It's a very feminine impulse to look at society and separate it into groups of like victims and oppressors, and then to sort of claim ownership of the victims and try to protect them and advance them to power. Because insofar as you're good at doing that, you're good at being a mother. And so a lot of what's going on in our society is that we have a lot of motherly instincts being misdirected to treat groups of people as though they're their wards or their pets, even though they're not their wards or their pets. And even though a lot of the people in those groups do not want to be treated that way, and are even being harmed by being treated that way. Any objection to the treatment is going to be felt by the mother as an unbearable offense. How dare you not want my love and help? I was doing this for you. And the retaliation is going to be maybe you and your group just need a time out. And up until this point, the child/victim groups have been in this sort of unholy marriage to their mother figure, the feminist movement, where they pretend to be victims and weak and helpless, and that wins them the attention of their feminism mother. Those groups become empowered that way, at the expense of the group that the feminism movement perceives as the oppressor class, primarily men. Anyway, since A Song of Ice and Fire, or any great work of fiction, is ultimately a symbol of real life, any big picture approach to this story inevitably is going to slide into this sort of symbolic language, where a character like Rhaegar, being a gay man, can be symbolic of all gay men or all gay people. And a character like Jon can be symbolic of all men, and a character like Daenerys can be symbolic of all women. And then gay people being perceived by the collective consciousness in the audience as a victimhood class can establish it as a symbol of all victimhood classes. Rhaegar being interested in playing the harp and just making music and singing in general is another one of those things that is traditionally coded gay. The only people left these days who are going to read that and consider to themselves, maybe Rhaegar was gay, are the types of people that the feminist movement hates, that they consider them toxically masculine, where they would say, what's wrong with a man playing a musical instrument? That's ridiculous. Not everybody who plays an instrument is gay just because they play an instrument or they sing or whatever. And granted, that's true. I would agree with that. But also, in the context of their setting, it's more abnormal for them than it is for us to want to sing and play the harp, if you're a man. In their culture, those are considered feminine activities, strongly, not just subtly. Whereas in our culture, they're hardly gendered at all. No one's going to look at you funny if you're a man who plays the guitar. But people might look at me funny if I were to sing, especially at a high pitch. So we haven't completely abandoned the gendering of an interest in music, even in our present-day culture. There's still remnants of it in certain parts of music. The Ice and Fire audience tends to apply their modern world attitudes to the dramas in the story, not noticing or not caring that the characters in the story don't actually have the same attitudes, and that changes the way those events should be interpreted. Catelyn Stark is a prime example of this. Readers tend to assume a major reason Catelyn dislikes Jon Snow is that he's a reminder of Ned's unfaithfulness. It's an emotional or spiritual betrayal. And while that emotional betrayal is certainly a part of the reason Catelyn dislikes Jon Snow, it's a small part, and the major part of Catelyn's dislike of Jon is shown to us in the thoughts of Catelyn herself. Catelyn is worried that Jon's presence in Winterfell will one day result in her own children being robbed of their inheritance. of Winterfell and House Stark. Once again, the story shows us that women value a man's wealth and status more than his faithfulness. Men are the reverse. We tend to value a woman's faithfulness more than her wealth or status. And like everyone, man or woman, we tend to assume that people see and feel about the world the same way we do. But the truth is, sometimes they don't. Sometimes those assumptions can blind us to the reality of other people. For an attractive woman, a man's undying devotion is an easy thing to get. But wealth and status of the magnitude of House Stark are much harder to get, and even harder to maintain, especially from generation to generation. And that's why Catelyn's main concerns with Jon Snow staying in the castle are about securing that wealth and status for her children, rather than about Ned's sexual unfaithfulness with another woman. And so Catelyn is one of the first and most potent characters or points in the story, upon which the audience's interpretations are hinged, where almost everything the audience thinks and believes about Catelyn is exactly wrong. The reality is the opposite of what they think. And ultimately what they think about Catelyn in general is that she's a villain because she abused Jon. And not abused him overtly, but more of the subtle, sort of negligent kind of abuse that is like easier to get away with and more feminine in nature and subtler and harder to spot. And throughout this story, hate for Catelyn comes up in pretty much all of the interpretations of Catelyn, where they call her stupid because she's superstitious. Actually, her superstitions turn out to be right in an unexpected way, that had people had listened to her and done what she wanted them to do at the time, things would have turned out way better for everyone. So she's kind of a prophetic character in that way, even though she doesn't tell prophecies per se. She senses the importance or the meanings of things long before other characters do. Like, she senses that the direwolves are important and should be protected, even when it seems like they're wrong and bad. That comes up repeatedly throughout the story, with Ned and then Robb and so on. They repeatedly fail to heed her, and it ends terribly for them. Catelyn is criticized for freeing the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister. But for anybody who's been paying attention to Jaime Lannister's story in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, in the end it may very well become the case that Catelyn freeing Jaime Lannister is what saved the lives of Catelyn's daughters, Arya and or Sansa, or at least returned them to Catelyn, such as Catelyn is at that point in the story, or at least returned them to Winterfell or the Stark family or safety. Any of those would be a win for Catelyn, right? And so what the audience doesn't understand about Catelyn's treatment of Jon is that far from being a villainous, abusive monster towards Jon, Catelyn's treatment of Jon was actually nothing short of saintly, given the political context of their society. Almost any other woman in the setting, if forced to tolerate their husband's bastard, who may or may not be older than your oldest son with the same husband, living in the castle alongside your own children, would have almost certainly in one way or another brought about the death of that baby, either by killing it herself, hiring someone to kill it, or staging some unfortunate accident, or whatever she has to do. If she was anybody but Catelyn, baby Jon Snow would have been dead. No question about it. And the reason is because in this setting, they know how important inheritance is. They know that there's no class advancement almost at all. That if you or your children or your grandchildren fall from the noble class into obscurity, and there's no way back into it. Everyone in your family after you is going to be a poor commoner, fated to die for somebody else's war, and scratching away at the earth for whatever meager living they can make. And so that's why with Jon Snow's parentage, Jon Snow being the true-born son of Ned and Ashara, and the firstborn son of Ned and Ashara, renders Catelyn right in the end. After all the audience's trashing of Catelyn and insisting that she's stupid and wrong about everything she does, and her most evil deed is disliking Jon Snow. Actually, it turns out she had a great reason to dislike and feel threatened by Jon Snow, because he was the true-born son of Ned and Ashara, and the legitimate heir to Winterfell, and in that way a threat to the inheritance of Catelyn's children, namely Robb. Because since Ned was married to Ashara before he was married to Catelyn, his marriage to Catelyn is illegitimate, and then all of Catelyn's children are bastards. And so Jon Stark is the only legitimate heir to Winterfell. And that's the secret that that Catelyn senses is there, correctly senses is there, and is afraid of. And so isn't it funny that one of the safest predictions I can make about the audience's interpretation of my interpretation here, that all of Catelyn's children are bastards, is that they're going to feel offended on behalf of Catelyn's children. Like, how dare you say Sansa and Robb and Arya and so on are bastards? But I love them, right? That's going to be the feeling. And there's going to be like a violent reaction against this interpretation for a while, undoubtedly. I think the self-awareness is going to creep in slowly, where they notice, well, actually, me being offended on their behalf for being bastards is pretty offensive to bastards in general, and gives the lie to my original stance that anybody who feels like bastards are less than is evil. Here I am treating these characters like they're suddenly less than, even though nothing about them has changed except this technical matter of inheritance. Bastardy and Catelyn. Yeah, Catelyn Stark is a huge point, or huge character, upon which the story's mysteries hinge. There's hardly anything in the central mysteries that isn't touching Catelyn, the audience's derangement about Catelyn in some way. It's actually incredible how much of the story's central mystery is hinged upon the audience incorrectly receiving Catelyn as a villain, rather than what she is. Which is really the most heroic woman in the story, as far as I can tell. Like Ned, she's the the best parent of her gender in the story. Where Ned's the best father and Catelyn's the best mother. Or husband and wife, if you prefer. And of course, the feminist movement's antinatalist attitudes, where they have this hatred, or at least pretend to hate, motherhood and having babies and all that. Catelyn being the primary mother of the story makes her a natural target for that hatred, and by extension for misinterpretation. Misinterpreting her as a villain who's wrong about everything, when she's more of a hero and right about everything. Just not in the way you expect. Well, I'm out of time. That's going to have to do it for this episode. Thanks for coming, guys. That's all for now. I hope it was helpful. Hope you got something out of it. This story never ceases to amaze me. See you next time.